Hello and welcome to Colleague 7 Sprint Review for 17.10.02. This is for the development undertaken between the 18th of October to the 31st of October. Starting with the sprint goal, and that was to utilise the findings from colleagues' new memory management solution to implement a series of performance improvements that will enhance the user's experience. Looking at the high-level items and to explain further, in this sprint, we've addressed several key findings following the memory management upgrades which were undertaken in the last sprint. This largely relates to the resolving of unnecessary data dictionary calls, which in turn have given a considerable benefit to loading times. We've also delivered updates to isolate several key session variables such as email login and OneDrive document checks. These previously formed part of the queue of items being loaded when opening a record. So by isolating these into a background mechanism, further speed and performance improvements have also been found. We've added a latest CV segment to the documents area, as well as updated the document information section to include the uploaded and amended dates of documents. This offers a clearer document history in this section, and I'll cover that in a demo shortly. We've implemented the first phase in a series of GDPR related updates. This covers at a basic level the right to consent fields and the process in which users are advised of a candidate or contact's consent status. As part of our objective to integrate with a timesheet portal, the developers have had an investigative item to review the steps required with an Evertime integration. Evertime is a timesheet management solution developed by the Eden Group and offers a candidate portal for timesheet submission and further back office integration options. Further updates on this will come in future development sprints. Also, as a final point, we've resolved an issue relating to the editing of documents and how these sometimes fail to come back into Colleague. We'll now go through a short demonstration on the key features from this sprint. Okay, so the first area I wanted to cover, and it's not really something I can demonstrate as such, more that it is simply the feel of the system performance-wise as you're navigating around the system. As I mentioned in the opening presentation, we've done a series of updates as part of this release relating to the speed in which records open, that being the priority. So some session variable work has gone in. The session variables are used behind some of the functionalities that you have available as workflow within the system, and also the data dictionary calls, which is obviously the pulling of data itself. There's been a series of updates relating to that to aid and improve the speed in which those functions perform, or isolate those functions so that they don't hold up other functions. So again, so the system can just perform at its optimal speed, and that's where we believe we've brought the system to at this point, a decent speed, so there is good flow navigating around the system when clicking on different records for it to open, so that it's an appropriate upgrade that people can receive. There's still performance upgrades and updates that we can make relating to certain areas and workflows in the background, and those updates will continue to happen, so that we're continually improving the product in that regard. But with regards to immediate performance improvements relating to the loading of records, which is our primary focus, we feel we've achieved that in this sprint, and we've taken the system forward in a good solid direction with regards to performance here. So that's performance with regards to what we've done in this sprint. Okay, so the next area I wanted to cover was the Documents tab, or specifically the Documents tab against the candidate record. And the Documents tab has had quite a bit of work done to it over the course of the last couple of sprints. So just to do a recap on this area as a whole, really. Firstly, to begin with, on the available documents list, the default document will now be in bold, so it's more apparent to the user which document out of the list is the default document. And on clicking that, obviously you have the loading and obviously the updated document preview mechanism, in which it brings through a HTML version of the document. So it's not a plain text view of a docx file. At least we've also incorporated a refresh button here now there relating to the preview, so that's more for the workflow relating to the edit. So if you edit a document through this workflow and choose to open the document, once you've edited it and obviously the document's been saved back, the idea is to then hit that button to refresh that preview, and obviously then the latest version of that document is obviously going to display in that preview area. In document information, we've added some updates here relating to the uploaded date and uploaded by, an amended date and amended by as well, and obviously the users that are associated with it. Also, the default option there used to be called default link, has been changed to default, and we fixed a bug that allowed more than one document to be allocated as a default document. It's now only one document that can be allocated there. But then we start going on to the latest CV workflow that's been added, and for that I'll just take a step back. So with with documents when they're being uploaded to the system or parsed against a record, with the document type you'll have obviously an assignment here of what kind of document it is that is obviously being linked with the record. And if I go to the admin area and go to lookups and just bring up the documents type list, that should help clarify how this functionality is going to work with the latest CV. So obviously against documents you're going to have different document types. So obviously photo is going to be within that list. Perhaps contracts will be in that list as well, terms of business that have been signed, and perhaps passport, that sort of thing. But you're going to have in there a CV document types are going to be in here, formatted CVs, original CVs. Perhaps you have another a CV type, but what we've added in here is an option here called CV type, which is a yes/no field. So against certain fields, that CV type is going to be no. Against others, that CV type would be set to yes, and obviously we'd look to ask that you set the CV type as it sees fit to yourself. What that then means within the candidate record is that for the latest CV section, it's going to display the most recent document that is obviously associated with that document type, or with a document type that's been classed as a CV type. Hopefully that made sense. And so yeah, essentially from that there, that then means that that's loaded automatically. It is an option if you wanted to override that as an option. So if you wanted to set perhaps this file, if perhaps you have an older file but you want to set that as your latest CV, you can click that button and it obviously sets that as the latest CV there. If you wanted to click on that button, that will then load the latest CV in the preview window. Also, there's an option here to clear the latest CV. So if it's been set and you want it to now be reverted back, so it's then automatically displaying of whatever is the latest CV. From the system's perspective, you can click on this button to clear the latest CV. You also have a field here for latest CV set by user, yes or no. So that will clearly make it clear to yourself whether or not the system has essentially assigned the latest CV itself, or whether or not someone has manually set the latest CV itself themselves to update in this area. Also, when you set a latest CV, a history record is created, just to make a note that this user set this record as a latest CV. So that's really it as part of the way that workflow works. Hopefully that all makes sense. But that's an overview now relating to the documents area. Obviously the documents area has been updated with regards to these settings and these options on all the records, but the latest CV is an update that's specifically relevant to the candidate record. So that's the update for the latest CV against documents. Okay, so the last point to cover relates to the GDPR right to consent phase 1 workflow that went into the system as part of this build. To begin with, before I start going through that in terms of demonstrating how that displays on the page, there is a global setting option that will turn this option on or off against both candidate and contact. So against the candidate section, you'll see an option here of enable GDPR right to consent feature, and that's a yes no option obviously. And against the contact, you'll also find enable GDPR right to consent, and again that's a yes no that you're seeing there. So against the global settings, you've obviously got the feature, the option to turn this feature off or on, and by default it will be turned off because this is phase 1 and we're obviously looking to fully deploy in all phases before fully enabling all the settings. But it's there to be turned on if you wish, because it does have workflow which is supported, it does function in that regard. So if I close down the admin area and go to a candidate record, I'll show you what I mean. So in the toolbar now, the additional option that's been added is this consent related icon that's there in the toolbar. So by default, obviously all records are going to be no consent. On clicking on that toolbar, it will bring down this alert view, and this is designed to obviously record with the consent has been given, and obviously the dates associated to when it was requested, and also when the response came back verifying one way or another. If you were to request consent, so Sarah's requested consent there, and press OK, then on reload of this record, what you'll see, or whenever you next go into this record, you'll see that obviously you're still awaiting consent from the candidate, and that's when you requested the consent. If you go into here and you now say that we've had that response and the response was a no, then next time you reload this page, or next time you go into this candidate, then you're going to have this message of candidate was not given their consent, record must be deleted. And again, obviously the icon stays as no consent, but if the candidate or contact was to advise that they've given consent, then this icon updates to say consent given, and essentially from there onwards no alerts will appear when you go into the record that the record is considered consent given and authorized to proceed. You have history records that are created as part of that workflow, or the updating of those fields, so you can track when consent was requested and when it was received. Also the fields are all searchable as well, so you can do searches looking for candidates where you've requested consent, but the consent perhaps is no, or the response is it hasn't come back yet. So the idea is obviously to give you the means to be able to search and build a list of candidates that you've contacted. Yeah, essentially that's phase one. That's the basics behind the consent process against that toolbar option. What comes next are some web service related works that go on in the background as part of the next sprints, but also the sprint after is phase 3, and that's the updating of the email form, so that will incorporate an option so that you can request consent, and by doing that it will then add a link into that email where the candidate or the contact can advise consent yes or no, and on the nature of them clicking on that link, it will then automatically update these fields, so that it's not a manual process that the users have to go through. These fields will update manually, history records will get created, and a notification will come through advising that the candidate or contact has either given consent or denied consent, and obviously from there onwards you can act accordingly. So that's an overview just in terms of phase 1 where we're at with regards to consent, and I'll obviously do a further demonstration when we're at a point to incorporate this into the email form. As always, if you have any queries or feedback, please get in touch. I'll be keen to hear from you. Also, for those using Colleague 7, feel free to submit your enhancement requests via the user voice integration. The next video will be the sprint plan for 17.11.01, and as always, this will contain a high-level overview on the items we intend to work on during this sprint. Thanks for watching.